Joey Drew Studios is finally releasing their third major installment in the universe of Bendy and the Ink Machine. Sometime later this year in 2024, we can expect to play Bendy the Cage. Luckily for us, we have a bunch of new screenshots for the game and an updated Steam store page. Steam has this game described as a first-person psychological horror game that takes place during the events of Bendy and the Dark Revival. The shadows are closing in. Fight the madness before it's too late. Now, it's important to point out the use of psychological horror. This is the first time in the franchise that they have used this to describe one of their games. Therefore, I think it's safe to say this is going to be a much more mature game. Definitely a step up from the previous two with a lot more horror. The Steam page also includes that Bendy the Cage is the fearful story of Henry and his escape from the Keeper prison known as the Pit. The darkest souls have been banished to this deep hellscape of metal and blood. Survival will require you to fight the madness before it devours you whole. So of course we will play as Henry as he tries to free the other prisoners and make sure everything is in place for Audrey to break the cycle. This game is going to be so much darker than the previous ones, and things are going to be a lot more fleshed out, literally. Which brings us to our first photo. Already at first glance, this is much more darker than before. We see a lost one who seems to be wearing something similar to the Saw reverse bear trap, meaning this must be used as a form of torture, as this could be hinting at evil experiments happening on the ones in prison. You'll notice how this enemy is not fully covered in black ink. We can start to see its skull bone, as it looks like the ink is rotting off of its body. The red we see could also be blood, confirming that the black ink is their skin. This is just another example of how the game is going to be so much darker, including blood and gore. The last thing to point out on this photo is Henry's axe, as it seems to be made out of other objects. The second photo shows us so much more. We see another lost one wearing the same head trap, but this time wielding some kind of makeshift weapon. It looks like part of a saw was taped to a wrench or some kind of tool, while Henry is holding a normal pipe. It seems like we might be able to craft different kinds of weapons from parts we find. This would definitely be a cool feature that I would love to see. Now, the area of the photo looks to be the prison cells, or somewhere around it, considering the cell style doors behind the lost one. You'll also notice a slight change in the overall art style of the game. Everything now has a bold outline to it. This does give the game a better appearance, I think. Environments have more textures and whatnot with less of a drawing feel. Yes, this is probably just a new art style, but I think this could be to show the difference in Henry's point of view compared to Audrey's. Maybe hinting at them being in different worlds or something along those lines. I mean, you get the idea. Now, there isn't a lot of information about this third photo. It does show us the prominent outlines that I was just talking about. This could be a location outside of the prison below the Keeper's factory. Although I do want to point out how the other Bendy games are much brighter with a heavier yellow color scheme. This one seems to be much darker and toned down. Obviously still with that yellow color, but clearly less saturated and more tan. And the last thing to point out about the photo is we see Henry with this axe again. Now, speaking of this axe, we also see it in the fourth photo, behind none other than Sammy Lawrence. This, along with a tweet from the game's developer, confirms the return of Sammy. He will be playing a major role in this new story. Sammy Lawrence had a short cameo in the Dark Revival and will now return to restore his creepy glory. So with the axe behind him, maybe he gives this to Henry. This could mean Henry and Sammy will join forces. What if Sammy helps Henry out of the cell and gives him this weapon? I mean, who knows? The axe is probably just something Henry picks up after he escapes the cell, but it is fun to speculate. In the last photo, we see another enemy, and again covered in what seems to be blood, further proving the idea that the enemies will now bleed and include gore. It's also important to mention what Henry's doing. He's blocking. This confirms blocking has been added to combat. This will also allow us to have a more tactical gameplay experience, as this is one thing many fans have wanted in the previous games. Because of this, enemies will now have more health. So I think it's safe to say that combat has gotten an overhaul, and I'm excited to see how it feels. The last thing to point out in this photo is that Henry is wearing a wedding band. If you're a super fan, you might remember that Henry had a wife back in the real world, and her name was Linda. kinda. It's cool to see this detail included into the game. So what do you guys think of Bendy the Cage? Are you excited for it? I can't wait to see some of the gameplay footage, so stay tuned for that, as I'll definitely be making a video about it once it's released. Let me know how you feel about this game in the comments below, and if you like horror game content like this, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to follow my Twitter at TerrifyT. Thanks for watching.